a lot of people don't even realize that's even a possibility.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And
a lot of landlords are very open to it.
Yeah, they're very open to it. I mean, as long as it's not ridiculous, right?
Exactly.
As long as it makes sense.
Real estate is really an opportunity. Most people are just not familiar. Let's change that.
Hey guys, welcome to the commercial department. My name is Brad Maxson.
I'm Gus Ortiz.
And we're going to be going ahead and talking about landlord to tenant negotiations today. How we can actually get these deals done, because we do know at the end of the day, our landlords want to get the most amount of money and our tenants want to get the best deal we can. So we're going to figure out how we can actually get that done for them, talk about some of the key terms that we often see on our LOIs and lease agreements, and how we kind of get to the bottom of it between the two sides.
Yeah, I think this is a really important conversation because I think a lot of business owners don't understand, and even landlords don't understand all the different elements that can be negotiated in a deal.
Mm-hmm.
I think landlords might be a little more familiar just because they own the property, and they will typically see tenants making offers for things. So even if they don't have, let's say, a broker, for example, they may still have a little more familiarity with it. But I find that tenants tend to have the least understanding of all the different things that can be negotiated. But it does happen from time to time that landlords are not as don't have necessarily the same nuanced familiarity with negotiations as a lot of brokers.
Yeah.
Primarily because brokers are kind of in this all day, every day.
Yep, that's their jam. Yep.
So, one of the big things that I see a lot of tenants and landlords focus on is the base rent, right? That's kind of the first thing they focus on. Hey, how much is base rent? And I think before we even get into, I guess, even negotiating that is, getting clarity between the two most prominent ways that rent is collected.
Mm-hmm.
So, the ones that I'm seeing the most of is primarily triple net leases, but there's also modified gross leases.
Yep.
So, what is your understanding of the difference between those two?
So right now, when it comes down to the triple nets, we're actually seeing that most tenants are preferring to go ahead and be inside of a triple net, just because the costs are already broken down when it comes to your taxes, your insurance, and your common area maintenance.
Now, the insurance is the property insurance,
Exactly.
not the business insurance.
Exactly. So a lot of people get that misunderstood. So the tenant themselves will still need to carry an insurance policy, but that at least covers the property insurance.
Mm-hmm.
So this way they know they're all set up. They have the dual coverage both on their end and the landlord, and they're good to go on that. A lot of tenants are actually moving closer to the triple net right now, and landlords prefer that structure because they're able to calculate pretty much down to the dollar amount.
Right. And these are uncontrollable things that, like the property taxes, property insurance, like the common area, that's not stuff that they
You
can
can't
really
get away
control.
from Uncle Sam.
Yeah, so it's not stuff they can control anyway. So, I mean, it's kind of fair for everybody. It's just basically saying, hey, listen, this is a pass-through cost. We can't control this. Like, this is what it is. What it is. We have to. We gotta charge it separately because we don't know how much it's going to go up or down over the years.
And then just like how you said, over the years they reevaluate year to year to make sure, hey, are we charging enough? Are we charging too much?
Right.
And even in some cases, which we've seen, they'll even go ahead and either give a kickback or put it onto the next year to reflect it on an overpayment.
An adjustment. Yeah, that's interesting that you say that because, all of that, the triple net component. So, the triple net component is an estimation.
Mm-hmm.
So they pay that up front, an estimated amount up front.
Yep.
And then over the year, hopefully that estimation was accurate.
As close as possible.
Yeah, and then when they do their reassessment, they're looking back at what the bills were for common area maintenance, insurance, and taxes, because obviously taxes comes at arrears. So they will find that out, and that's where that credit comes from, right? That potential credit, or sometimes in some cases, it's actually there's money that's owed, like you said, that has to maybe either be paid up front or maybe pushed into the next year's triple net fees. So I think that these are sort of like really nuanced things that a lot of tenants are just not. Specifically, tenants are not familiar with.
Yeah, it can surprise them at times, for sure.
So, I do think it is important to understand what that part is, so that they understand that it's not, typically if they're looking at a modified gross, which means that all of that is tied into the lease itself, like that same cost is still tied into the lease. So when you're looking at rents and you see one property is listed for $25 plus a triple net, and then you see the other one is listed at $30 a square foot and it's modified gross, they may be the same month over
essence.
month, because it might be triple net, that might be $5, and then you have like both essentially kind of doing the same thing. The difference is modified gross doesn't allow either party to be able to, I guess, clearly break out what the total costs are and how that's going to ultimately reflect over time. So, and I think there are different brokers that might argue which is better for who.
Yeah, advantages to both,
Yeah.
whether you're a landlord or a tenant.
Yeah. So, but it ultimately kind of all comes down to the same thing. I think the triple net makes it a little more clear as to how those numbers are broken down.
I agree.
Yeah. So, so after you kind of so now that we have an understanding of like what triple net is and modified gross, like what tends to be the thing that you find is the next most important thing for tenants or landlords that they want to see negotiated in a deal?
Now, aside from what the actual lease is, the next most important thing that I'm seeing, other than the actual dollar amount of the base rent, because we do know that sticks out to everyone.
Sure.
Honestly, I would say is the build out right now.
Okay.
We have a lot of people that are going ahead and looking at spaces that are either incomplete or in shell form. And a lot of these tenants don't necessarily realize before the process that they might have to go ahead and put some skin into the game to be able to get their space built out exactly how they want it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are used to a lot of these spaces being already prefabbed or pre-set up to where they can kind of come in, move in, and get it going, and that's not as common anymore. There is a lot of corrections that people have to make to some of these businesses.
Yeah, I wonder if that, I feel like that has a lot to do with, there's a lot of growth, and especially in our market, right? We're seeing a lot of growth, so there's a lot of newer buildings.
Yeah, and we're seeing a lot of landlords do repositionings, changing up one building to fit another type of business. So.
Yeah, that's fair. The other thing is, if a business that was in there that had a different configuration, like now the new business has to reconfigure that space.
Exactly.
And sometimes the build out, the TI, which is tenant improvement, either a credit or dollars, can be from the landlord's perspective. They really don't want to have to spend too much money on that. They want to say, hey, I want to give you. Oftentimes they'll at least offer to make it a clean slate.
Exactly.
Like they'll pay enough TI to kind of give you a box.
Yeah, a shell.
Yeah. So, and then you have to build out the rest of the space, which seems reasonable for the most part, right? So, I know that TI, what I've seen at least is that TI can be offered as just straight cash.
Yep.
So like, before they get started, the tenant does their build out and then they get reimbursed cash based on receipts and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The other way that I've seen it also is through credit. So like they get a credit that's applied, so the landlord is not out any cash, right? They just offer that as a credit towards their lease.
Yep.
So then they get that. Essentially they get their first few months
discounted,
either discounted or paid. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it's almost like an initial investment for the business. Yeah, and a lot of times we will see tenants kind of prefer to do something like that rather than receive a credit, because after they go ahead and they complete the build out, that gives them kind of time to ramp into it at times, especially for newer businesses.
Absolutely. I mean, even existing businesses.
Yeah.
So, I could totally see that though. Yeah, but you're right. For newer businesses, it's probably way more impactful.
Exactly. And even I was going to say, just like how you said, even with existing businesses, but even sometimes with existing businesses, it could be on the other end of the scale to where they're looking for more stability. Maybe they're looking to have it as flat as possible rather than an inclining rent or anything like that.
That's one of the things that we saw. We were negotiating a deal. That deal didn't end up turning out, but one of the most important parts to that particular tenant was sort of a stable rent over the course of the lease, and so most leases are about 5 years. That's the average lease a period. But we do get some that are like 3, typically not less than 3.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you'll see 7 or 10 depending on the tenant. And then in the lease there are built-in annual increases that are negotiated in advance. That's part of the negotiation, right? So that's something that I think a lot of tenants don't think about. They think, oh, I'm negotiating a lease like they would a rent for a home. And they think, oh, well, I'm negotiating this rent. This is the rent I'm going to be paying for the entirety of the lease. Where in commercial, typically that is that there are increases automatically built in. It's just a question of how much. Typically in our market, we're seeing, what would you say, between 3 and 5%?
Yeah, 3 to 5%.
Right.
Very common. I am seeing on the lower end on 3% right now.
Yeah.
Landlords are being very favorable on the increases
Yeah,
towards
yeah,
tenants.
Yeah.
But anywhere between 3 to 5%, I'd say, is in the realm of being normal.
Okay. So, to my point of what I was saying earlier, we had a tenant that was interested in wanting to have some more stability with their rent. So they wanted their rent to stay the same. So what we did was we got what the leases were, what the base rent is for this year. And then we kind of did the math out for the 5 years they wanted to be in the space.
Increases, yes,
including the increases. And then we figured out what the average was. And then we ended up, instead of it being, let's say, $22 a square foot, it was $25 a square foot was the average. And we just made that for the entire lease.
Yep.
And they were actually very happy with it. We showed the landlord. The landlord was actually, at first, was a little nervous about it because he's so used to seeing the annual increases. But once he saw how we did the math, he was much more open to that idea. So that was something that was really important to them. They wanted to keep the same amount of rent for the 5 years that they're going to be in the space. So, even stuff like that is stuff that can be negotiated in a deal as long as it makes sense for everybody.
Yeah, especially as long as it makes sense for everyone. And luckily with that landlord, unfortunately the deal didn't come together, but he also understood, just like how you said, how the math came together. Because a lot of times landlords obviously want to, year over year, make more money.
Sure.
But again, once you average out that number, it's really a question of, do I want stability or do I want to go ahead and look for another tenant in this space?
Right. Yeah. And I think that, the math, I think, can sometimes be a little bit daunting just because you're doing math across multiple years. Yeah. And that, some people are math people and some like numbers people and some people aren't.
Yeah.
And, we have landlords ourselves that are not math people.
And then we have landlords ourselves that do the math quicker in their heads than us.
Correct. So, for those folks that, for us at least, it's important for us to really have a good understanding of the math so that we can share in plain language how this is beneficial both for the landlord and for the tenant.
Yeah.
So, if you're a tenant or a landlord looking into putting together a lease, understanding the math is going to be really important in that whole process. So, all right. So now that we got the base rent, we've talked about triple net. We touched on
buildout and
TI, build out and TI. So those are obviously costs that you got to take into consideration. What's another element that you feel would be is something that can be negotiated in the deal?
So another element that I would say is something that is underrated in being negotiated in the deal is early access, actually.
Okay. What does that mean?
So pretty much what early access is, for all those who might not know, is before the lease actually commences in terms of payments, the tenants are allowed access to the space. Whether that's for their contractors for the build out, whether that's for themselves to get set up for a short amount of time, whatever that early access period is, that allows the tenant to get into the space, start reconfiguring with the landlord's approval, get everything together, and then know, okay, this is my early access period, and with this date, my rent will commence and I'll start making payments.
Right. Now, I think that's great because a lot of people don't even realize that's even a possibility.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And
a lot of landlords are very open to it.
Yeah, they're very open to it. As long as it's not ridiculous, right?
Exactly.
As long as it makes sense.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's great because it gives the tenant an opportunity to get access to the building without having necessarily a responsibility for paying rent and for, like you said, that build out time, because they're already spending money to actually build out the space and they're not making any income during that window. That's a really great opportunity to take advantage of at least some of that. Now, on the one of the other elements that's very similar to early access is abatement.
Yes, so that was going to be the next one I wanted to talk about.
So
yes, sir.
that's a fancy term for essentially free rent, right?
We all love free rent.
Yeah. So free rent can be negotiated. I see it negotiated pretty often, but it does depend on the terms. If the tenant's being super aggressive, sometimes the landlord won't offer free rent.
Yeah,
so
or even we'll receive pushback on our ask, depending on what we've been asking for already.
Yeah. So what have you been seeing in terms of like abated rent? Like how much time have you been seeing that landlords and tenants are coming to an agreement on for abated rent, assuming the tenant's not being terribly aggressive and the landlord's not being unreasonable.
Yeah. So right now, at least from the past couple of deals that we've seen, I've seen that landlords are very open to anywhere between 1 to 3 months.
Okay.
Almost as long as we haven't been beating them up on our side. Almost little to no pushback when we make that ask for rent abatement. Most of the time, when we go ahead and we go in, we also explain to the landlord with our terms, because just like you said, we don't want to beat them up. We also want to put leverage into it so they feel like, oh yeah, I will give them a month or two of free rent. So most of the time we try to set it up with a little bit of a longer lease, 5 years or more. We try to go ahead and understand what the market is, understand what the landlord is looking for, and get close to, if we are negotiating that number, get close to still what they're looking for that base rent.
Yeah.
So then we can make the ask for that free rent, because pretty much just like early access, or even when it comes to getting some money back from your build out from the TI allowance, this would allow the tenant pretty much to scale into the space. Especially for new businesses, this can be very, very handy. Because it'll allow them pretty much to get their operations going. Maybe you weren't even a business that was mobile or online. Maybe you're a brand new retail and you need customers to flow in so you can start producing. That gives you a 1 to 3 or maybe even more month head start. So okay, let me get some cash flow. Let me get some of my reserves built up before worrying about paying for the landlord.
Right.
And then come that second, first, third, whatever it might be month. Now, ideally, you would be able to go ahead and just start making payments.
Right. You've generated some income. Now you have some money to actually pay the rent without a problem.
Exactly.
So, for rent abatement, one of the things that's different than early access, just for as a note, is that early access, usually there's no money that's going to be exchanged during that window. So that time typically tends to be smaller.
Yeah, it's mainly just a timeline. Just a timeline that they're going ahead and moving back and forth when it comes to early access.
And then the abatement is still free rent, but oftentimes if there is a triple net, that triple net will still be owed.
Exactly.
So the base rent is basically like not charged, but there would still be that triple net amount that is going to be covered during that same
operating and all of that.
Yeah, that's going to be your taxes, the non-controllable
things you can't get away.
Right.
Yeah.
So those things are still going to be charged. The other thing that we're also seeing, at least that I've seen, is that if the landlord has a little bit of hesitancy on abatement, is to tack on, let's say, the 3 or 4 months on the back end of the lease.
Yep.
So instead of it being, let's say, on a 5-year lease to 60 months, we might do for 4 months of abatement, we might say it's a 64-month lease with the first 4 months being abated.
Yeah, and actually, especially if we are receiving pushback on rent abatement in general, that's a very good tactic as long as the tenant is open to it.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, putting it towards the end of the lease can cause it to be slightly more than if they paid it at the front. But it still goes ahead and gives them that same roll up to where, hey, I don't have to worry about payments other than what my actual operating expenses are for these first X amount of time.
Yeah.
And it's very intriguing to the landlord, because a savvy landlord will understand that, hey, if I charge for these 2, 3, 4 months on the back end compared to 2, 3, 4 months on the front end,
Right, increases the value of the lease.
I'll make a little bit more.
Yeah. It takes more time, but they're still wagering on the tenant being there for that time period. So okay, so all right, so now we've gotten into abatement, and really now it's just kind of getting into sort of like smaller nuanced things.
Yeah, like maintenance, or maybe some other things like when it comes down to signage, and also what the landlord might do to assist the tenant with that. And all those types of things. Yeah.
So maintenance is a good one to kind of chat about, because I do see some tenants get caught up in this.
Yes.
There are cases to be had for the tenant being responsible for all the maintenance of the property, and then there's some arguments for having the landlord being responsible for the maintenance of the property. Typically what we see, at least what I've been seeing, is depending on how I guess the structure of the deal, because that really makes a huge difference as to what gets negotiated, all this stuff, how this all gets negotiated out. But what we typically see that both parties seem to be pretty open to is the tenant has some responsibility up to like a set dollar amount.
Yeah.
And then the landlord kicks in thereafter. So, because sometimes the landlord will try to push all that maintenance to the tenant.
And I would say more times than not right
Yeah.
now. The last handful of deals that we've had to actually dive in and negotiate maintenance
Correct.
because the landlord was asking for 100% of it to be on the tenant.
Correct. And in some cases, it's not a big deal.
No,
because,
in some cases not. No.
Because, like, for example, if you have either a building that's relatively new, or maybe the building has just been renovated or updated with systems.
Yeah, and I was just going to use the example of our warehouse that we just did, because same thing, brand new. The AC system was less than 2 years old, and even though they weren't necessarily willing to work with us on building in a cap for the maintenance, we understand it's mainly a warehouse. It only has one AC unit for the office space, and it's newer. So after going ahead and evaluating that with the tenants and looking at some of the other terms we were also trying to talk about, they decided, you know what, we can actually live with this as long as we go ahead and we do a confirmation as in an inspection to confirm, okay, we're not kind of shooting ourselves in the foot with this AC.
Yeah. And that I think that was that a 5-year deal?
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, you know, AC units typically last
3 years.
That was a 3 year. So that's short window. So AC units will certainly last. Brand new AC units should last easily 3 to 5. Most AC units are lasting, you know, especially for commercial units, 15 to 20 years. So I think that's a relatively low risk, right, for the tenant to take on for the full maintenance, because usually the most expensive thing is the HVAC unit.
Yeah, and allowed that tenant to pivot off of the maintenance and focus on some of the other terms they cared more about. Correct.
Now, on the flip side of that, if they were to walk in and the AC is already 15 years old, and then the landlord saying, hey, you're responsible for maintaining to replacing that HVAC unit.
I love that part.
That's something where the tenant should push back and say, I don't think so. Like, I'll cover some amount, but I mean, I didn't use this for the last 15 years. So that would be a situation that, you know, I think is where that maintenance negotiation is going to be super helpful. And you have to be careful, because there are landlords that they'll just kind of write that up in the lease, and if the tenant's not paying attention, they'll be stuck. Right. So there was actually a tenant that they had initially been referred to me, and they decided to kind of go on their own, and which is fine, you know, but they ended up getting into a lease, and they did not pay attention to their maintenance clause. And they ended up moving in, it was for, I think, a bakery that was in one of the local towns. And the building was just an older building. And I guess they didn't do the appropriate due diligence on the building. Well, the landlord put the maintenance on them in this older building. And they found out as they were doing their build out that the entire building was infested with termites. And when you're talking about food, unfortunately, like, you got to get rid of that. Otherwise you can't do business. And the challenge is that building, the portion that they were leasing, was attached to other buildings. So the only way to kind of get rid of it, you got to do the whole building. Right? So, and they were responsible for doing the maintenance on the property. So the landlord basically wiped their hands clean of it and said, hey, that's on you.
Appreciate you guys.
So they ended up having to essentially close down, because they couldn't, I mean, you couldn't afford to do it. The cost would have been astronomical. The maintenance would have included tenting the whole building.
And not even to mention if they had to replace any framing or whatever it was.
So, I mean, that's a situation where maintenance, not only did that just kill that deal, it killed the business. So, and that's sad to see, you know, like when you see situations like that where they were going in, they thought they negotiated a good deal and found out that they had this real major problem that prevented them from actually having and running their business in space. So that's sad to see that. So, you know, it is important. Maintenance is a very important element that you need to pay very close attention to, because if you don't, you can really get caught up in that, and that could really decimate your business and in a way that you might not be able to recover from. So, so maintenance is a big one. I definitely think maintenance is a big one. Are there any other elements that you see negotiated in a deal?
When it comes down to it, we've covered maintenance, we've covered early access, we've covered talking about, well, actually, I think we just saved the best for last, base rent. I think.
Yeah, I mean, I guess negotiating the base rent itself. Yeah. Okay, so talk about that.
So right now, we're actually seeing a lot of landlords are really sticking to their guns on what their base rent is, and that is kind of surprising in this market when we are seeing some of these leases sit anywhere for 6 to 9 months, even in some cases up to a year. But right now, landlords are being very firm on that base rent. And there's other ways we can get around it, of course, whether that means that the tenants, going back onto some of the other terms we've talked about now, whether that means the tenants take on some more responsibility in the build out to go ahead and assist the landlord. We'll prepare your space if you give us a discount, or even things like it can even be the maintenance of, hey, we will take responsibility for everything if you give us a discount.
Right.
So there's different ways we could skin the cat when it comes down to that one. But I will say, out of all the terms right now, that is the one that the landlords have been most firm on.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think, again, this goes back to understanding the math.
Exactly.
Right? Because there's even ways that you can kind of play with, for example, if you're comfortable, if you feel like your business is going to be like really rocking once you kind of get settled, but you just need that help on the front end, you can negotiate your lease in any way that you want in terms of the base rent. So you can do a sliding scale, like maybe you start with a heavy discount, but then you have really big annual increases, right?
Yeah.
You can even do a really huge discount on year one and then build that discount, like that gets basically repaid over year 2 through 5, for example. So there's a number of different ways that you can structure that deal so that you can get, if you need a bigger break on the front end, but you feel like once you get settled, you'll be in a good place. There are ways for you to be able to do that. So it's just a question of making sure the numbers make sense for the landlord, just like you want it to make sense for the tenant.
Yeah. So I mean, whether it's through other terms, increases, length of time is a big one as well.
Yeah.
I have seen, when we jump from maybe a 3 to 5 years to, hey, we'll stay here for 10 years.
Yeah.
The landlord will be a little bit more open
Absolutely.
to speaking about base rent.
Time makes a huge difference.
Yeah, so all three of those factors I feel like play a key role into it. But just like you said, you can't really negotiate base rent unless, first off, you put yourself in the landlord's shoes, and second off, you understand the math.
Right.
So.
And then all the different terms that, I think also what both parties, I think, tend to have a challenge with this is understanding what's important to the other side. So if you're a landlord, understanding, well, what's the most important thing for the tenant? And then if you're the tenant, what's the most important thing for the landlord? Figuring out, okay, can I make the math work to help them with the thing that they want? Right? And if you can, then you could potentially make a deal happen.
100%.
Right? You may be able to negotiate things that you didn't consider before, but actually would make a difference for you and your business, or if you're the landlord for the lease.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think those are the big major elements for negotiation. So if you're looking to negotiate a deal, I mean, these are things that you definitely want to be thinking about, in the deal. I know there's a lot of stuff we kind of covered. There's some nuanced elements that we didn't necessarily get into. We kind of just want to talk about sort of the bigger elements that, most leases tend to deal with as it relates to negotiation. So, if you do have any questions about a lease or wanting to negotiate maybe even renegotiate a current lease that you're in, which can happen. That's not unusual. If you're in a lease and your lease is ending and you don't want to necessarily renew at the same rate, you want to renegotiate a better deal, that's something that we can help with too. Mm-hmm. So, and I say we as brokers, as commercial brokers in general. It doesn't have to be us, but we're happy to help if you want to give us a call. So, I think that you covered a lot of really great stuff, really meaty stuff as it relates to working with tenants and landlords. So, do you have any other comments?
No, the only thing I wanted to go ahead and say is make sure not only do you go ahead and you have us on your team, but also a big part of this, the wrap up to this is as a tenant or a landlord, I also wanted to go ahead and just give a final call that, excuse me, that us as agents, we're going to be the initial wave to help you negotiate, see the terms, understand those terms, but also keep in mind you want to build a team around you. So we've mentioned the build out. You want to make sure that we go ahead and we get you teamed up with a GC. Also, when we get down to the lease terms, we want to make sure that you have an attorney in pocket to do a final review of all that. So pretty much we set you up with the team who's going to fill those stop gaps to keep you from falling through any of those cracks. So that's the final part I just wanted to say to all this, because I mean, really, when we see a tenant or a landlord put together with those vendors, we have a way more successful.
Absolutely. It's usually tends to be more seamless in the whole process, for both parties.
Yeah.
All right.
But
cool.
That's my final note. Aside from that, I did want to go ahead and say thank you guys for coming through and listening to us today. If you guys had any other questions, feel free to reach out to me. My number is 352-396-5827. And again, I'm Brad Maxon.
Awesome. Hey, this is the Commercial Department Podcast. We're going to be here every week. If you have any questions, leave a comment below, and then we'll definitely respond to you as quickly as possible. Talk to you guys later. Peace.